Found deep within the eternal darkness of the universe, eldritch entities dwell that haunt our dreams and terrorize our waking minds. We wish to escape so that we can obtain at least some level of peace, but such desires are found beyond our reach. Greetings and welcome to Checkpoint Gaming. For this episode, we'll be going over how to play the game Cards of Cthulhu. With Cards of Cthulhu is a tabletop game that relies upon dice, cards, and strategy in order to see victory, and was designed by Ian Richard and published by Dan Version Games. Although the rules are written as if playing a single-player game, the game is able to be played with multiple players, but with a few modifications which will be addressed later in this episode. Besides the base game, it also comes with an expansion that is known as Beyond the Veil. The game's premise is that with sinister cults trying to awaken the elder gods with the aim of plummeting the world into an endless nightmare. But the awakening of a god isn't an easy task, must require numerous minions to perform the ritual in order to make it successful. The player takes advantage of this in combating the different cults by preventing the minions from gathering enough strength to accomplish this goal. During each turn, the player will draw cards from the cult deck which represents the gathering forces of the given cults that are found in the game. After drawing these cards, the player will attack one of the cult boards. In the base game, this consists of Arwasha, Charnarfon, Cthulhu, and Yog-Sothoth, while Beyond the Veil introduces Nyarlathotep. The point behind attacking these boards is to reduce the number of minions found on any given board in order to prevent them from attaining enough strength to summon their respective elder god. Failing to do this will doom the world. With the components of the game, it includes 4 cult boards from the base game, 1 cult board from Beyond the Veil, 108 cards in the base game that are of differing types, 108 cards in the Beyond the Veil expansion that build off the initial cards, a set of dice, experience coins, a help sheet, and a rule book. It is worth noting that with the Beyond the Veil card, they possess the word Veil in the lower left-hand corner that allow them to be easily removed from the cult deck if the player wishes to play without them. With the investigators that were introduced in Beyond the Veil, they can be chosen by the player even if they're playing the game without the use of the expansion. This also extends to the followers and items that come with the expansion. With the cult boards, they include the Arwasha cult board, the Charnarfon cult board, the Cthulhu cult board, the Nyarlathotep cult board, and the Yog-Sothoth cult board. With each cult board, they have areas for the respective gate cards, meaning cards, and horror cards. Each cult also possesses its own symbol, which is used to identify not only the cult board, but also to identify which cult the minion, horror, or gate belongs to. The symbols also include corresponding color. When it comes to placing the cult boards, they will always be placed onto the cult board that matches their respective symbol and color. We also suspect that the symbols also exist to help the colorblind figure out which board is which. With the cult of Arwasha, its symbol is that of the horned skull, and its given color is red. With the cult of Charnarfon, its symbol is that of a thin, streamlined head with horns and tentacles, and its given color is yellow. With the cult of Cthulhu, its symbol is that of a lobed head with tentacles, and its given color is green. With the cult of Nyarlathotep, its symbol is that of a bullhead with 2 pairs of horns, one pair facing forward and the other facing backwards, and its given color is purple. With the cult of Yog-Sothoth, its symbol is that of a crab head with appendages, and its given color is that of light blue. With the help sheet, it lists the turn order, magic spells, and other necessary information in order to play the game. With the help sheet that comes with Beyond the Veil, it has been updated, so we will recommend using the updated sheet when playing. With the minion cards, they exist to awaken a sleeping horror, and when 5 or more of them are present upon any given cult board at the end of the player's turn, it will cause their respective elder god to be summoned into our reality. If this occurs, the player has lost the game, since no mortal is capable of facing such beings. Each minion card also possesses a numerical value to it that is located in the upper left-hand corner of the card and represents the strength of that given minion. With the gate cards, they bring minions and horrors into the world at an accelerated rate. These gates should be quickly destroyed in order to prevent, or at least slow down, the cults from summoning their elder god. With the horror cards, they represent creatures of such a fearsome nature, they test the investigator upon their awakening. Though these horrors don't possess a numerical value to them, and they don't contribute toward the summoning of their respective god, their arrival will challenge the sanity of the investigator. With the investigator, the player will choose one of them to represent them within the game, with the player only being able to use the investigator's given skill once per turn. The investigator cards also possess a special backing to them in order to identify them as investigators and are not part of the cult deck. With the follower cards, they are essentially weaker versions of the investigators and are part of the cult deck. When drawn during the game, they can be purchased and used against the cult boards through the use of the unique skill, which is, of course, a weaker version of the skill found with their associated investigator. And with item cards, they can be purchased and used in battle against the cults. But beware, there are also cursed items that are within the cult deck which will hamper the player's efforts during the game. Beyond the Veil also introduces 2 new means of play. The first is seen between 2 investigation cards, where the investigator and the followers will be assigned to it in an attempt to solve it. If successful, the player will be rewarded, while if they fail, they will be penalized. The second edition is seen with 10 power cards, where each cult has access to 2 of them. With each power card that is put into play, you'll see the respective cult grow in power. When it comes to that of the dice, they are divided into red body dice, green health dice, and white spirit dice. When engaging in combat, each player starts off with 1 body die that represents the investigator's physical body and 2 health dice, which represents the investigator's additional pool of hit points and are used to help defeat the minions and horrors during combat. So at the start of the game, the investigator basically has 3 hit points. If a player rolls a 1 upon their body die, then their investigator is wounded and will lose a single health die. But if they roll a 1 on the body die and they don't have any health dice left, then the investigator is killed and they will lose the game. And whenever a player loses a health die, they're able to retain 1 through healing. With that said, players are unable to heal themselves to the point where they'll be able to gain more than 2 health dice. With every number that is rolled, including that of 1s, they can be used to kill minions and horrors during combat. With the spirit dice, a player has access to a maximum of 4 of them during the game. But with that said, the player is only able to purchase up to 3 of them during any given turn. When purchased, they give temporary aid to the player during combat, and in order to use a 4th spirit die, it will have to be acquired through the purchase of the Sword of the Crusader item. In order to obtain the use of these spirit dice, they're purchased through the spirit die magic spell and are single-use purchases. Although they're not retained at the end of combat, they can be purchased again for each attack. Finally, we have experience coins, which are used to keep track of the player's unspent experience points. When a player slays a minion or horror, closes a gate, or chooses to not purchase a follower or item, they will gain experience from it. With the use of experience, it is to purchase spells, followers, and items to close gates and to resist sanity loss. It is worth noting that the number of experience coins as available to the player doesn't limit the experience the player can obtain. If the player runs out of experience coins during the game, then they'll be able to use some other marker in order to track their unspent experience. Cult cards can also be used to track experience, which are to be placed close to the investigator instead of into the discard pile as the player kills minions, kills horrors, or closes gates and can be spent when needed. Each minion, gate, and unpurchased item or follower is worth 1 experience, while horrors are worth their combo values. With the Beyond the Veil expansion, silver 5-piece experience coins have been added to the game for players to use, with chains being made as needed using the other coins or experience indicators. When setting up the base game, place 4 cult boards upon the play area in front of the player. Though this typically consists of the 4 boards from the base game, we feel like the players should be allowed to be able to swap out one of the base cult boards with a narrow level tip cult board, as long as the player also swaps out the cult cards for the removed cult board and replaces them with the corresponding cult cards for narrow level tip. From there, separate the investigator cards from the base cult deck, where the base cult deck consists of 10 followers, 12 items, and 76 cult cards, where 19 cards exist for each cult board. With these 19 cult cards, they consist of 2 gates, 3 horrors, which includes 1 minor, 1 major, and 1 unspeakable horror, and 14 minion cards that consist of numerical values that run from 2 through 10, with the minion cards that are valued 7 through 10 only possess 1 copy, while those that are valued 2 through 6 possess 2 copies. From there, the player will select 1 investigator to represent them during gameplay, with the remaining investigators being put aside. Once that is done, shuffle the cult deck and place it within easy reach along with the body die, health dice, and spirit dice. Also have the help sheet nearby. And unless otherwise stated, the investigator starts with 4 experience, which is represented by 4 experience coins being placed upon the investigator. If wanting to play the Beyond the Veil expansion, shuffle in all the minions, horrors, cult powers, investigators, followers, and items into the cult deck. From there, if playing with the expansion and incorporating the expansion cards into the cult deck, the player will decide how long they'll like the game to last, which is based upon the side of the deck, with 4 options being available: tome, novel, novella, and short story. But if playing with the base game, just use the cult deck that comes with the base game and don't alter the size of said deck. With the tome option, the entire deck is to be used and 4 cult cards are to be drawn each turn. With the novel option, use half the deck and draw 5 cult cards each turn. In order to create this deck, cut the deck in half, which is done by feel or by drawing out 100 cards. With the novella option, use a third of the deck and draw 6 cards each turn. In order to create this deck, cut it into thirds, which is done by feel or by drawing out 67 cards. With the short story option, use a quarter of the deck and draw 7 cult cards each turn. In order to create this deck, cut it into quarters, which is done by feel or drawing out 50 cards. From there, place the cult board upon the table, 4 when playing the base game and 5 when playing the expansion, with the appropriate number of experience coins being placed upon the investigator card. With the game's objective, regardless of what variant is being played, is to prevent the awakening of an elder god. But if the player is able to empty the cult deck without the world coming to an end, then the player has prevented the arrival of the elder god and has won the game. When it comes to that of turn order, it consists of the following phases, which are performed in this order: the summoning phase, the combat phase, and the outcome phase. It is worth noting that each player will take an entire turn before passing the dice to the next player if playing with multiple players. With the summoning phase, the player will start by reactivating their followers, followed by drawing cult cards. After drawing the cult cards and playing them upon the respective boards, the player can either purchase or discard followers and items if they are drawn. If playing Beyond the Veil, place the cult power cards next to their corresponding cult board, with any investigation cards being placed in front of the player, which are to be dealt with during the combat phase. From there, awaken any horrors that are applicable, followed by performing any sanity loss. With the combat phase, if playing with Beyond the Veil, then choose an active investigation to target. Once that has been completed, for the players who are playing the base game, the player will choose a cult board to target. From there, the player will roll the dice that they have assigned to the investigation and our cult board. The player will also have the option to re-roll their investigation and combat dice if so desired, with the new results being applied. With the cards that are found upon the cult board, they will protect each other, something that we will be talking about momentarily. When combat has been completed, any appropriate experience will be given to the player. Finally, we have the outcome phase, where the player will check if the defeat conditions are applied. If not, then it will check for victory or flip conditions. During the summoning phase, the player will start by reactivating the followers that they might possess. The player will then draw and flip 4 cult cards during standard play. Any followers or items that are drawn during this phase will be set aside for purchasing purposes. When a minion card is drawn, it is replaced into the minion area of its respective cult board, stacking them in a staggering manner with their strength value being visible. When the gate card is drawn and flipped, it is replaced into the gate area of the respective cult board. Whenever a cult board possesses 1 or more gate cards upon it, it will cause an extra cult card to be drawn each turn, with its effect being immediate. So when a gate card is drawn and flipped, an additional cult card is immediately drawn during this turn. So if the player is unfortunate enough to flip 4 gate cards during their initial draw, then said player will have to flip 4 additional cult cards on top of the base draw. And if there are any cult cards found upon any of the cult boards, an additional cult card is to be flipped as well for each gate card found upon each cult board. If each cult board possesses a gate card, then the unfortunate player will have to draw 8 cult cards and any additional gate cards that are flipped. So the player finds themselves in a crap situation where they have 4 gate cards in play and they draw 4 additional gate cards. First, blame the person who shuffled the deck, and second, they draw at least 12 cult cards on their turn. When drawing a gate card for a cult board that is already in possession of a gate card, place the new gate card on top of the gate card that is already found upon said cult board. Although the player will have to draw a new cult card to the gate card found on the cult board and a gate card that was just flipped, the new gate card will prevent any gate cards found underneath it from activating in any subsequent turns. So even if a cult board has 2 more gate cards upon it, only the top gate card is active during the draw process, but it's only causing 1 additional cult card to be flipped instead of 2 or more. But with that said, all of the gate cards found upon the cult board will have to be destroyed in order to stop them from generating an extra card draw in future turns. With the horrors, they are entities that are not from this world and will have to be awakened on their plane of existence by their respective minions in order to unleash their terrors upon the earth. When a horror is drawn, it will be placed face down upon the designated space upon the respective cult board, indicating that they are asleep. When the horror is placed face up, it indicates that the horror has awakened. When a follower or item is drawn, the player will have the option of either purchasing them or discarding them, which can be done in any order that the player wishes. They also possess a purchase cost, which is found in the upper left-hand corner of the card for followers and the top right-hand corner of the card for item. In order to purchase the follower or item, the player will need to pay the required experience during the purchase step. With any follower or item that is purchased, they are placed next to the investigator for future use. For every follower or item that gets discarded, the player will gain 1 experience. The player can also purchase as many followers or items as they wish, as long as they are able to afford them. Each follower or item also comes with its own cost in order to use its ability, with its cost found to the left of the ability's text. When the player uses the follower's or item's ability, they can only do so once per turn, even if the player gains an extra combat attack for the magic spells. Unless stated otherwise, the player can only use the follower's or item's ability during the combat phase. In addition to their ability, a benefit of purchasing a follower is that when a player suffers a sanity loss or wound, they can slay a follower instead in order to absorb the effect. With these cards, they can possess the following effects: any, discard, or slay. With any, it refers to any of the specified cards that are found upon the cult board. With discard, it means that the player is to discard the given card in game by placing it into the discard pile, but they are unable to gain any experience for doing so. With slay, it means that the player is to remove the given card from the game by placing it into the discard pile. And by doing so, the player will gain experience each time which will result in the slaying of a minion, horror, or gate card. With cult power cards, each cult board possesses 2 of them, and if they are incorporated into the game, when drawn, they will be placed next to their corresponding cult board with the printed powers only affecting said board. When a cult board possesses 1 cult power, only use the information that is found upon the top half of the card. But when it possesses 2 cult power cards, the second card is replaced next to the first one with the information that is found upon the bottom half of the card being used. If a cult board possesses 2 power cards and one gets destroyed, then revert back to using only the information found on the top half of the card. With the Arwasa cult powers, if 1 cult power card is in play, it will add a value of 1 to each minion that is found upon its cult board. But if both cult power cards are in play, then the value is increased by 2. The Charter of 1 cult powers. If only 1 cult power card is in play, it will prevent any experience from being gained for slaying any minion found upon its cult board that has a value of 2 through 4. But if both cult power cards are in play, then the player will be prevented from gaining experience for the slaying of any minions found upon its cult board that has a value of 2 through 7. With the Cthulhu cult powers, if 1 cult power card is in play, it will allow any horror found on its cult board to be awakened with 1 less minion than initially needed. But if both cult power cards are in play, then the horror found upon its cult board will be awakened with 2 less minions than initially needed. So basically speaking, these cult power cards make it easier for a horror to awaken. For the Neo level up cult powers, if 1 cult power card is in play, it will require the player to pay 2 additional experience in order to use the Seal Gate spell on any gate that is found upon its cult board. But if both cult power cards are in play, then the player will have to pay 4 additional experience in order to use the Seal Gate spell on any gate that is found upon its cult board. Well, the Yoggs also have cult powers. If one cult power card is in play, they'll pay 1 experience in order to roll combat dice against his cult board. But if both cult power cards are in play, then the player will have to pay 2 experience in order to roll combat dice against his cult board. With the investigation card, and incorporating them into the game, they represent information and clues that an investigator can use to aid them in their fight against the cults. If the player chooses to investigate, then it will gain the card's benefits. But if the player chooses not to engage in an investigation or fails to complete it, then it will suffer the card's penalty. During the Awakened Horror step, if the cult power possesses any sleeping horrors upon it, see if there is enough minions present on said cult board to awaken them. With a minor horror, it will awaken if there are 2 or more minions found upon its cult board. With a major horror, it will awaken if there are 3 or more minions found upon its cult board. And with an unspeakable horror, it will awaken if there are 4 or more minions found upon its cult board. So if there are enough minions found upon the applicable cult board, then the appropriate horror will awaken, causing this card to be turned face up in its corresponding horror slot. But as long as there aren't enough minions found upon the appropriate cult board, it will remain face down, indicating that it's still asleep. But once a horror has awakened, it will remain awake, regardless of how many minions found upon his respective cult board. But when there is an awakened horror present during this phase, then the player will have to experience sanity loss, thus causing the player to immediately discard experience as equal to the horror's combo value or sacrifice one of the followers. If multiple horrors are awakened, then only the most powerful horror will inflict sanity loss instead of all the awakened horrors. Otherwise, the game mechanics would be broken, thus distracting from the game's enjoyment. Where the player is unable to play the necessary experience and doesn't have a follower to sacrifice, then their investigator has gone insane and they will lose the game. But if the player does successfully pass the sanity test, they'll move on to the combat phase, starting with the player deciding which investigation they wish to target, which is done by allocating the investigator and or followers each investigation that's found in front of them. This is assuming that they're playing with investigation cards. But if they aren't playing with investigation cards, then skip this step. The targeting of the investigation card is represented by the player placing the dice onto said investigation. If an investigator is assigned, then the player will have to place all the dice, which includes any spare dice that they possess, onto said investigation. And up to 3 spare dice can be purchased in order to help the player with an investigation. Using dice that were assigned to the investigation card, the player will have to roll equal to or greater than the investigate value printed upon said investigation in order for it to be successful. If successful, then the player will gain the reward found upon the card, which is printed in black. But if they are unsuccessful or they decide not to attempt it, then the player will suffer the investigation's negative result, which is printed in red. With trying to complete an investigation, it counts as an investigator's action as well as the follower's action if a follower is used. And if the player would like to participate in another action, which includes participating in a second investigation or attack a cult board, they'll have to purchase a hurry spell in order to do so. The player can even choose to attack a cult board followed by purchasing a hurry spell in order to participate in an investigation. If the player doesn't use their investigator to participate in an investigation, they are still able to send any followers they possess to deal with it. With the followers, any number of them can participate in an investigation, which is done by placing 1 die upon the investigation card for each follower that the player assigns to it, with the player being able to assign multiple followers to a single investigation. It is worth noting that the player can try to complete any number of investigations during any given turn. With each investigation card, they have 2 values printed on them, the investigate value and the damage value. With the investigate value, if the dice value roll is equal to or greater than the listed value, the investigation has been successfully completed and the player will gain the benefit from the investigation card. This is done by totaling all the dice values together. It is worth noting that the player does have the option to pick up any of the dice they wish and re-roll them. But this includes any die result that inflicted a wound upon the investigator, slaying a follower, or as a result of one upon it. With the damage value, if the follower die roll is equal to or lower than the listed value, then the follower is slain. And if the player rolls a value upon the investigator's body die that is equal to or less than the damage value, the investigator will suffer a wound. When rolling the follower die, the player will announce which of the follower's die is representative of each follower before rolling it. The player can only use each of the followers once per turn. When using the follower, they can participate in an investigation or use their skill, but not both. When trying to complete an investigation, the player only has 1 chance to do it, and if the roll and reroll fails, then all of the dice are to be removed from the card. The player will suffer the penalty, and the investigation card is to be discarded. If the player doesn't attempt to complete an investigation, then the player will immediately suffer the negative effects. And with the completion of the investigation and attacking cult board, they can be done in any order. With text found upon an investigation card, it will vary based upon the card in question. With draw next turn, it will increase the number of cards to be drawn to the cult deck during the next draw step based upon the value listed upon said card. From there, discard any followers, items, or investigations that are drawn and place any minion, follower, or gate card onto a respective cult board. With draw and discard, the player will immediately draw the designated number of cult cards from the cult deck and place them into the discard pile. With discarded follower or item, the player will be able to choose any of the followers or items that they possess and immediately discard them, including any cursed items they possess. With place 1 follower on top of the draw deck, the player will be able to choose any of the followers and place it top on the cult deck. When drawn during a future turn, the player has the option of repurchasing said follower as normal. will suffer a sanity attack. The player will immediately suffer a sanity attack that is equal to the designated value. Finally, we have save, which will result in the card to be placed in front of said player, who will be able to use it when needed in a future turn. The placing of horrors upon the cult board. If a horror is drawn that possesses the same combo value as a horror that is already found upon the respective cult board, then the second horror is to be placed atop of the first one. And if the cult board possesses 2 copies of the same horror, the player will have to slay them individually. When there's enough minions present to awaken these horrors, then all the copies of the horrors will be awakened. But with that said, the player will only experience sanity loss once, regardless of how many horrors are awakened. From there, the player will be able to attack these horrors by placing the necessary combo dice onto each horror. But if only one is slain, then the player will have to deal with the other awakened horror during the next turn. When they attack into the cult board, after the cult cards have been placed upon them, the player can choose to fight them with the aim of eliminating said cult cards. The player can also choose to skip this turn, though it is still a good idea to do so. But if the player chooses to engage in combat, the player will have to first select which cult board they want to attack. This will cause any dice that are rolled to only affect the selected board to slay any of the cards found upon it. When attacking the cult board, the player will roll the 2 health dice, 1 body dice, and any spirit dice that they purchased. The aim of this roll is to use the values found upon the dice in order to slay the minions or horrors found on the cult board that they are attacking. After this initial roll, the player will choose to reroll any dice result as long as the dice result isn't a 1 or a wound. If a 1 is rolled upon a player's body die, it represents a situation where the cult was able to wound the investigator, thus causing the player to either set aside one of the health dice at the end of the combat phase or to sacrifice one of the followers. If a health die is set aside, then the player will be unable to roll it again until their investigator has been healed. And if the player loses both their health dice and they roll a 1 upon the body die, then the investigator has died and the game ends in failure. When a player attacks the cult board that possesses a awakened horror, they have a greater chance of getting wounded. So instead of getting wounded upon a roll of 1 upon their body die, the player will get wounded based upon the dice combo value associated with the most powerful horror found upon the cult board. So if a major horror is awake, the player will be wounded upon a body die roll of 1, 2, or 3. They are unable to reroll the body die if the result leads to a wound when fighting a horror. With the cult cards that are found upon the given cult board, they will protect each other depending upon the state they currently find themselves in. When the cult board possesses minions and sleeping horror, the minions will protect said horror. The minions will also protect any gates that are found upon the given cult board. So the player is required to slay the minions before they can attack the sleeping horror or to use a seal spell to close the gate. But with an awakened horror, it will protect the minions that are found upon his given cult board, thus preventing the player from being able to attack the minions until all the awakened horrors have been slain. After rolling the combat dice, the player will decide how to go about distributing them upon the selected cult board. In order to slay a minion, the player will have to place a die or dice onto a minion card that possesses a strength value that is equal to or less than the die or dice that have been placed onto it, causing it to be slain. For every minion that is slain, the player will gain 1 experience for it. The combat dice are also used to slay horrors, and if there are multiple horrors found upon the cult board as being attacked, then the player can choose which horror or horror they wish to attack. After rolling their combat dice, the player can choose how to allocate their dice in order to slay a horror. But the slaying of an awakened horror is much more challenging than it is to slay a minion. This is because when trying to slay an awakened horror, the player will have to create a matching combo or a run combo with the combat dice they rolled. With the matching combo, it consists of multiple dice that possess the same numerical value on them and allocating them to a horror. For example, this is when the player rolls multiple 2s or multiple 4s. With the run combo, it consists of multiple dice that possess a sequential order of them when allocating them to a horror. An example of this is when the player rolls a 4, 5, and 6 with at least 3 combat dice. To slay a minor horror, the player will have to roll a 2 dice combo and will suffer a wound with the body die result is that of a 1 or 2. To slay a major horror, the player will have to roll a 3 dice combo and will suffer a wound with the body dice result is that of a 1, 2, or 3. To slay an unspeakable horror, the player will have to roll a 4 dice combo and will suffer a wound with the body die result is that of a 1, 2, 3, or 4. When slaying a sleeping horror, it is done by placing dice upon said horror with the number of dice placed upon it equal to the horror's combo value. Although the dice that are placed upon it can possess any value to them, the body dice still has to be rolled to see if a wound occurs. When slaying a horror, the player will gain experience equal to his combo value, so a slain minor horror grants 2 experience, a slain major horror grants 3 experience, and a slain unspeakable horror grants 4 experience. And the experience that is gained for slaying a horror is the same regardless if it's awake or asleep. At the end of the game, there cannot be any awakened horrors found upon any of the cult boards. If there are, the game will continue with the player experiencing sanity loss each turn until there is no more awakened horrors found upon the cult boards or the investigator has gone insane or dies. With the attacking of a gate, the player will have to spend 3 experience in order to purchase the Seal Gate spell, and upon doing so, it will destroy an unprotected gate that is found upon the targeted cult board. When a gate gets destroyed, it is moved to the discard pile and will grant the player 1 experience. For every piece of experience that a player obtains from slaying minions and horrors, destroying a gate, and not purchasing a follower or item, they can be used to activate a magic spell, to purchase followers and items, use abilities of an investigator and follower, and to resist sanity loss. When experience is awarded, it is done after each combat phase, where the player can then use said experience to purchase magic spells and abilities during any future attack. Any experience coins that are spent are returned to the general pile, which can then be cycled back to the pile and the players as needed. So at the gain of experience, the player will gain 1 experience coin for each of the following: slaying a minion, destroying a gate, not purchasing a follower, and not purchasing an item. But with slaying a horror, the player will gain experience coins based upon the horror's dice combo value, which ranges from 2 through 4. Following the combat phase is the outcome phase. Start by checking for failure, which consists of the player checking each cult board to see if any given cult board possesses 5 or more minions upon it. If so, then the cult has successfully summoned their respective elder god, and the game immediately ends in failure. But if the game doesn't end in failure, check for victory, which consists of the player checking if the cult deck has run out of cards, there are 4 or less minions found upon each cult board, and there are no awakened horrors. If these conditions are met, then the player has won the game. But if there are any awakened horrors, then the player will continue with the player not drawing any more cards once the cult deck has been depleted. Regarding magic spells, players have the opportunity to purchase them through the expenditure of experience or single use during the round, and will have an immediate effect upon the game when purchased. First is a spell is that of the spirit dice. Each spirit dice costs 1 experience to purchase, and 3 of them can be purchased at any time before engaging in combat. They're bought during the attack phase, used during the combat phase, and all spirit dice that the player wants to use will have to be bought before combat begins in order to assist them in their given combat role. If the player wishes to hurry so that they can perform a second attack, they'll have to purchase the spirit dice again due to the spirit dice not carrying over between attacks. The second listed spell is that of Hurry. It costs 2 experience to purchase, and can be done so after performing an initial attack in order to perform another attack during the turn. But with that said, the spell can only be purchased once per turn. The third listed spell is that of Healing. It costs 3 experience to purchase, and it causes the player to recover 1 previously lost health die. The player can only purchase the spell once per turn, and it cannot be used to exceed the 2 health dice. The fourth listed spell is that of Seal a Gate. It costs 3 experience to purchase, and uses to destroy an unprotected gate found upon a cult board that has been targeted by a player. And as long as the player has enough experience, the spell can be purchased multiple times during a turn. With the spell taken care of, let's now look at the investigators and followers. We'll address these 2 categories together, since a fair number of investigators also possess an equivalent follower. With the investigators, they represent the characters that the player is able to choose from in order to play the game, while the followers are like items and will have to be purchased if the player wishes to use them. But in either case, the player will have to pay an experience cost in order to use a skill that is found upon said investigator or follower. With the base game, it comes with 10 investigators and 10 equivalent followers, while Beyond the Veil introduces 4 new investigators and 6 new followers, with these followers being separate for the investigators. But with that said, we'll indicate if an investigator possesses an equivalent follower or not. First, we have the actress, who doesn't come with an equivalent follower. Her investigator skill is that of Famous, which causes her to start the game with 2 random followers, which comes at no cost to the player. Second, we have the Big Game Hunter, who does come with an equivalent follower. His investigation skill is that of Tracking, which allows the player to discard any 1 horror found upon any of the cult boards before suffering sanity loss. This horror can be found upon any cult board, can be awake or asleep, and can even be protected. This comes at a cost of 3 experience. With the follower equivalent, it costs the player 1 experience to purchase, and has the skill of Elephant Gun, which allows the player to discard any 1 minor horror. This minor horror can be found upon any cult board, can be awake or asleep, and can even be protected. This skill costs 1 experience to use. Third, we have Detective, who doesn't come with an equivalent follower. Her investigator skill is that of Gumshoe, which allows the player to freely roll 1 investigation die against any given investigation each turn. This allows the player to attack a board and perform an investigation without having to buy the Hurry spell. This comes at no cost to the player. Fourth, we have the Doctor, who does come with an equivalent follower. His investigation skill is that of Medical Bag, which allows the player to heal 1 wound found upon any wounded investigator, thus allowing the investigator to regain 1 lost health die. This comes at the cost of 1 experience. With the follower equivalent, it doesn't cost the player any experience to obtain, which is nice, as the player will get free follower and has the skill of Medical Care, which allows the player to heal 1 wound, just like the investigator. This comes at a cost of 2 experience. Fifth, we have the Drunk, who doesn't come with an equivalent follower. His investigator skill is that of Drink It Away, which allows the player to pay 1 less experience when dealing with a sanity loss. This comes at no cost to the player. Sixth, we have the Explorer, who does come with an equivalent follower. His investigator skill is that of Tracking, which allows the player to roll and re-roll their combat dice before deciding upon which cult board to attack. This makes the Explorer the only exception to the rule about having to choose a cult board before rolling and re-rolling combat dice. This comes at no cost to the player. With the follower equivalent, it costs the player 2 experience to purchase and has the skill of Exploration, which allows the player to roll and re-roll their combat dice before deciding upon which cult board to attack, which is beneficial if bought by one of the other investigators. This comes at no cost to the player. 7th, we have the Gambler, who doesn't come with an equivalent follower. His investigator skill is that of Lady Luck, which allows the player to roll a single die before drawing any occult cards. If the player decides to do this, they'll experience one of the two following outcomes. If they roll a 1 or 2, they'll suffer a single wound. If they roll a 5 or a 6, they'll gain 4 experience. This comes at no cost to the player. 8th, we have the Journalist, who does come with an equivalent follower. Her investigator skill is that of front page news, which allows the player to gain 1 extra experience for the slaying of a horror, regardless if the horror is awake or asleep. This comes at no cost to the player. With the follower equivalent, it costs the player 1 experience to purchase and has the skill of Major Story, which allows the player to draw and then discard 1 card of the cult deck after slaying a major horror, which can be used multiple times during a given turn. This comes at no cost to the player. 9th, we have the Priest, who does come with an equivalent follower. His investigator skill is that of Faith, which allows the player to reroll any of their health or spirit dice when the respective result is that of 1. But if the player rolls a 1 again on the reroll, they will be unable to reroll it again. This comes at no cost to the player. With the follower equivalent, it costs the player 1 experience to purchase and has the skill of Prayer, which allows the player to reroll any of their spirit dice when the respective result is that of 1. But if the player rolls a 1 again on the reroll, they will be unable to reroll it again. This comes at no cost to the player. 10th, we have the Psychologist, who does come with an equivalent follower. His investigator skill is that of Strength of Will, which allows the player to stop insanity loss upon a single die roll of 4 or higher. This comes at no cost to the player. With the follower equivalent, it costs the player 1 experience to purchase and has the skill of Hypnosis, which allows the player to stop insanity loss upon a single die roll of 5 or higher. This comes at no cost to the player. 11th, we have the Ritualist, who does come with an equivalent follower. His investigator skill is that of Command Spell, which allows the player to move any one minion from any given cult board to another. This comes at no cost to the player. With the follower equivalent, it costs the player 1 experience to purchase and has the skill of Misdirection Spell, which allows the player to move any one minion that has a value of 4 or less from any cult board to another. This comes at no cost to the player. 12th, we have the Soldier, who does come with an equivalent follower. His investigator skill is that of Rifle, which allows the player to discard any one minion that possesses a value of 6 or less. This comes at a cost of 1 experience. With the follower equivalent, it costs the player 1 experience to purchase and has the skill of Sidearm, which allows the player to discard any one minion that possesses a value of 3 or less. This comes at a cost of 1 experience. 13th, we have the Thief, who does come with an equivalent follower. Her investigator skill is that of Friends, which allows the player to purchase an item and has a cost of 3 experience or more to cost 2 or less experience. This ability can be used once per turn and comes at no cost to the player. With the follower equivalent, it costs the player 1 experience to purchase and has the skill of Black Market, which allows the player to purchase any item that has a cost of 3 experience or more to cost 1 less. This ability can be used once per turn and comes at no cost to the player. This can also work in conjunction with a Thief Investigator to further reduce the cost of an item. And 14th, we have the Tycoon, who does come with an equivalent follower. His investigator skill is that of Wealth, which allows the player to start off with 8 experience instead of 4. This makes the Tycoon the only exception to the rule about starting with 4 experience. This comes at no cost to the player. With the follower equivalent, it doesn't cost the player any experience, which is nice, with the follower's associated skill being that of Rich Friend, which allows the player to gain 2 experience when the player obtains this card. With that taken care of, let's take a look at the standalone followers that don't have an equivalent investigator. First, we have the Art Dealer, which costs the player 1 experience to purchase and has skill of Artist's Eye, which allows the player to add 3 or more investigation dice to the investigation die roll after checking the investigation damage value. This comes at no cost to the player. The Art Dealer is also able to be sent on an investigation and to use their ability. Second, we have the Assistant, which costs the player 1 experience to purchase and has the skill of Research, which allows the player to discard a cult power card. This comes at the cost of 1 experience. With that said, the follower is best included in the cult deck when playing with the expansion rules, as that is when the cult power cards are included in the cult deck. But even then, this follower is useful in base play since they can be sacrificed when the situation calls for it. Third, we have the Dog, which doesn't cost the player any experience to purchase and has the skill of Loyal Companion, which allows the player to discard this follower in order to discard any one card from any one cult board at the end of the combat phase. This comes at no cost to the player. Fourth, we have Herbert West, which costs the player 4 experience to purchase and has the skill of Reanimation, which causes a discarded follower to be placed underneath this card, except when the follower gets discarded from underneath Herbert. When discarding followers from underneath Herbert, the player can treat them as if they were 2 experience. This comes at no cost to the player. Herbert West is also able to be sent on an investigation and to use his ability. Fifth, we have the Madman, which costs the player 2 experience to purchase and has the skill of Embrace the Chaos, which allows the player to add 1 to their investigation die roll before they check the investigation damage value. This comes at no cost to the player. The Madman is also able to be sent on an investigation and to use his ability. And sixth, we have Randolph Carter, which costs the player 3 experience to purchase and has the skill of Strength of Will, which allows the player to reroll their body die if the roll would inflict a wound. If the player chooses to reroll, then shuffle Randolph Carter back into the cult deck. The game also comes with a number of different items. When drawn from the cult deck, the player has the option of purchasing the item or discarding it. When the use of an item, it can only be used once per turn, even if the player hurries. 9 items come with the base game, and 7 come with Beyond the Veil. If the player wishes to incorporate the Beyond the Veil items into the base game, where only 4 cult boards are in play, we think the player should be allowed to do so. We also think that the player can add certain items into the cult deck while removing other items in order to keep the item count at 9. This can be done at random, where the player can choose which items to add and which ones to remove. The first item we have is the Central Portal, which costs 3 experience to purchase, nothing to use, and comes with the Beyond the Veil expansion. With this ability, the player will have to discard this item in order to discard any and all gates found upon any one cult board, so if a given cult board possesses several gates upon it, this item allows the player to get rid of all of them. The second item we have is that of Dark Magic Spell, which costs 1 experience to purchase, nothing to use, and comes with Beyond the Veil expansion. With this ability, instead of suffering 1 wound, this player will have to draw 5 extra cult deck cards next turn, discarding any followers and items that just so happen to be drawn. The third item we have is that of Disruption Ritual, which costs 3 experience to purchase, 1 experience to use, and comes with the base game. With its ability, it allows the player to draw 1 less cult card the turn it was used. The fourth item we have is Dynamite, which costs 5 experience to purchase, nothing to use, and comes with the Beyond the Veil expansion. With its ability, the player will have to discard this card in order to perform a roll and reroll and get any 1 cult board or investigation, which consists of a standalone 5 dice attack. Since it's a standalone attack, do not combine this item's roll with any investigation or follower dice. Once used, the player is able to conduct an investigation or attack a cult board as normal, followed by using the hurry spell if desired. And any minions and or horrors that are slain, the player will gain experience as normal. The fifth item we have is the Elder Sign, which costs 1 experience to purchase, nothing to use, and comes with the base game. With its ability, the player will have to discard this card instead of having to suffer a sanity loss, thus cancelling out the effects of the sanity loss. The sixth item we have is the Heartstone, which costs 1 experience to purchase, nothing to use, and comes with the Beyond the Veil expansion. With its ability, it allows the player to discard any 1 item, including this one, instead of suffering a wound. The seventh item we have is that of Hunting Rifle, which costs 3 experience to purchase, 1 experience to use, and comes with the Beyond the Veil expansion. With its ability, it allows the player to either add or subtract 1 from any 1 combat die. The eighth item we have is that of Melting Flesh Spell, which costs 5 experience to purchase, 2 experience to use, and comes with the Beyond the Veil expansion. With its ability, it allows the player to discard all of the cultists and cultist slaters found upon all of the cult boards. The original text from the card in rulebook reads, discard all cultists and cultist slaters and nothing else. Based upon this information, we made the deduction that it applies to all cult boards, so that's how we think this card is to be played. But if the publisher intended otherwise, we look forward to hearing from them. The ninth item we have is that of Necklace of the Veil, which costs 2 experience to purchase, nothing to use, and comes with the base game. With its ability, it allows the player to discard this item in order to discard any gate that is in play, even if the gate is protected. The ninth item we have is the Necronomicon, which costs 4 experience to purchase, 2 experience to use, and comes with the base game. With its ability, it allows the player to discard any gate that is in play, even if the gate is protected. The 11th item we have is the Otherworldly Idol, which costs 1 experience to purchase, nothing to use, and comes with the base game. With its ability, it allows the player to slay 1 of the followers during the combat phase in order to discard any horror found upon any of the cult boards, regardless if it is awake or asleep, and regardless if it's protected or not. Unfortunately, the player doesn't gain any experience from this action. The 12th item we have is that of the Poison Trap, which costs 1 experience to purchase, nothing to use, and comes with the Beyond the Veil expansion. With its ability, it allows the player to immediately place it upon any cult board, thus causing the next minion to be placed upon that given cult board to be immediately discarded along with this item. The 13th item we have is that of Potion of Wisdom, which costs 1 experience to purchase, nothing to use, and comes with the base game. With its ability, it allows the player to discard this item instead of paying any given experience cost. So this item can be discarded to buy a spirit die, to pay for sanity loss, to purchase another item, or to use the ability found upon an investigator, follower, or other item. The 4th item we have is that of the Ritual Dagger, which costs 1 experience to purchase, nothing to use, and comes with the base game. With its ability, it allows the player to discard this item in order to treat it as if it was a spirit die of any desired value. This is in addition to any spirit dice that the player has already purchased, thus making the use of this item to be a metaphorical 4th spirit die. The 5th item we have is that of the Sword of the Crusader, which costs 5 experience to purchase, nothing to use, and comes with the base game. With its ability, it allows the player to roll 1 additional spirit die for free, in addition to any spirit dice that the player has bought for the given combat roll. So basically speaking, it gives the player a 4th spirit die. We feel that this is a really valuable item to purchase, so we highly recommend that you purchase it if possible. And the 6th item we have is that of the Temple of Light, which costs 3 experience to purchase, 1 experience to use, and comes with base game. With its ability, it allows the player to draw and then discard 2 cult cards from the cult deck. Since the player has to discard these cards, the player won't gain any experience for discarding any follower or item cards. The game also comes with a number of different cursed items which are found within the cult deck. These cursed items focus upon otherworldly powers that will do what they can to act against the player. When drawn during the purchase step, the player will have to either pay the purchase price that is listed within the text field or suffer the consequences. The cursed item will then be discarded once the player resolves the effects. 3 cursed items come with the base game and 2 come with Beyond the Veil. If the player wishes to incorporate the Beyond the Veil items into the base game where only 4 cursed items are in play, we think that the player should be allowed to do so. We also think that the player can add certain items into the cult deck while removing other items in order to keep the cursed item count at 3. This can be done at random, where the player can choose which cursed item to add and which ones to remove. The first cursed item is the Cursed Charm, which comes with Beyond the Veil expansion and forces the player to reroll all 6s. This cursed item cannot be discarded until the player slays a horror. The second cursed item we have is the Cursed Cubes, which comes with the base game and forces the player to pay 2 experience to discard it. When the player is unable to pay this experience cost, then they'll be unable to reroll any of the dice during the turn that this cursed item was drawn. The third cursed item we have is the Cursed Scroll, which comes with the base game and forces the player to pay 2 experience to discard it. Well, if the player is unable to pay this experience cost, then they'll have to immediately draw 3 additional cult cards. The fourth cursed item we have is the Cursed Symbols, which comes with the Beyond the Veil expansion and requires the player to draw 1 additional cult card for every gate that is in play. The upside to this is that the player can draw 1 less cult card this turn for every follower or experience the player discards before drawing from the cult deck. And the fifth cursed item we have is the Cursed Temple, which comes with the base game and requires the player to slay one of the followers. But if the player is unable to do this, or chooses not to, then they cannot use any magic spells this turn. Although it's not explicitly stated, we feel like the player has the option to not slay any of the followers, if they have any, if they don't wish to do so. With all that taken care of, we can go over the optional rules found in the game. The first option is to play with the Beyond the Veil expansion, something we addressed through the course of this episode. The second option is to play with multiple players, with 4 players being the optimal number. With each person playing, they will choose an investigator to use during gameplay. From there, play will progress normally with the following modifications. This starts with the players rolling to see who will be going first. The player who rolls the highest number will go first, with turn progressing clockwise around the table, with each player taking their turn as normal. This includes checking if the defeat or victory conditions have been met before passing to the next player. Players will also only be able to use their investigator skills during their turn, and they can only use the experience they possess in order to purchase followers or items, to use magic spells, or to stop sanity loss. And only the followers that belong to a given player are allowed to be slain in order to stop the sanity loss for the investigator they belong to. With that said, a player can choose to allow another player to use one of the items or the skill that's connected with one of the followers. In order to do this, the other player will have to pay an experience cost that is associated with the item or skill. In order to indicate that a follower or item has been used, it is to be turned 90 degrees. It's the responsibility of each player to keep track of their own given investigators' injuries and experience. At the beginning of each player's turn, they will untap other tapped followers and items so that they return to their upright position in order to indicate that they're ready to be used once again. When the horror inflicts a sanity loss, it will only affect the active player. And if an investigator is slain due to wounds or sanity loss, gameplay will continue with the remaining players. With the multiplayer game will come to an end when 1. All the investigators have been killed, 2. The cult deck has been depleted and all the awakened horrors have been slain, or 3. There is 5 or more minions found on any given cult board at the end of any player's turn, thus summoning an elder horror and causing the end of the world. With multiplayer games, the side of the game is going to be cooperative or competitive in nature. With a cooperative game, if any investigator survives to the end, then all the players will win. But with a competitive game, if more than one investigator survives to the end, then the player who has slain the most minions, gates, and horrors will win the game, with each slain horror being worth its combo value in points. We're thinking that as a means of tracking the slain minions, gates, and horrors, these slain items are to be placed next to the investigator instead of going into the discard pile. The third option is to score the game results for purposes of future reference, which can be done with any game variant. With scoring, it looks like this. For winning the game, the player will score 50 points. For each cult board that doesn't possess any cards upon it, score an additional 10 points. And for every unspent experience the player possesses, he'll add 1 point. But for every minion that is still found upon the cult boards, 2 points are to be subtracted, while each David horror will subtract 1 point. For each gate that remains open, 3 points are to be subtracted, and for each unhealed wound the investigator possesses, a further 3 points are to be subtracted. Once performing all these steps, the player will have their final score. The fourth option is to alter the difficulty of the game to fit the needs of the player. If the player wants to reduce the difficulty, then only draw 3 cult cards each turn instead of 4. But if the player wants to increase the difficulty, then they can draw 5 cult cards each turn instead of 4. The fifth option is to play a game with a scenario in place. But with the playing of a scenario is limited to the Beyond the Veil expansion. When setting up the game for scenario, follow the information that is listed within the scenario description. And unless otherwise stated, all the normal game rules are in play. With the scenario's failure and success parameters, the requirements are adjusted accordingly. Players are also able to play scenarios in any order they wish. The first scenario is entitled Alliances and can be played with 1 or more players. With investigator selection, any investigator is allowed to be selected with the starting experience value consisting of 4. The cult board that are to be used consists of Fawn, Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, and Yog-Sothoth. The game duration consists of the tome deck, the draw rate being that of 4. With the scenario special rules, since the Arwasha cult board is to one side, all the Arwasha and Cthulhu cult power cards are placed upon the Cthulhu cult board. When slaying cultists and cultist leaders that belong to Arwasha and Cthulhu cults, they are worth 2 experience points instead of 1. With the defeat and victory conditions, they consist of the normal requirements that were addressed earlier. The second scenario is entitled Cursed Gates and is played with 1 player. With the investigator selection is limited to that of the actress, and the starting experience value consisting of 4. The cult boards that are to be used consist of all 5 boards. The game duration consists of the novel deck, the draw rate being that of 5. With the scenario special rules, none of the gates are able to be destroyed by any means, thus making the game increasingly challenging as the scenario progresses. When followers are flipped, they are able to be purchased for free. With the defeat and victory conditions, they consist of the normal requirements that were addressed earlier. The third scenario is entitled My Name and can be played with 1 or more players. With the investigator selection, any investigator is allowed to be selected, the starting experience value consisting of 4. The cult board that are to be used consists of all 5 boards. The game duration consists of novella deck, with the draw rate being that of 5. With the scenario special rules, the player will have to capture 1 minion of each strength level, with the strength level running from 2 through 10. In order to capture a minion, the player will need to allocate the exact dice value as needed to slay it. Although multiple dice can be used to achieve this, the value will have to be exact. Once a player has captured 1 of each minion type, they will immediately win the scenario. When capturing minions, they can be obtained from any board and will not grant any experience, but the discarding of a captured minion will give the player 2 experience. With the captured minions, the player can only possess 1 of each strength level at a time. At the start of the scenario, the player will possess the Dynamite item card. With the defeat conditions, they consist of the normal requirements that were addressed earlier. The fourth scenario is entitled Last Stand of Sanity and is played with 1 player. With investigator selection is limited to that of the drunk, with the starting experience value consisting of 10. The cult boards that are to be used consist of all 5 boards. The game duration consists of a special duration which is addressed in the scenario special rules. With the scenario special rules, 25 cult cards are drawn at the start of the game, with investigations, gates, and cursed items being discarded and new cards drawn to replace them. With any followers and items that are drawn, they will be placed next to the investigator, and the player gains to purchase or discard them as normal. With this given scenario, it occurs over 1 extended turn. After purchasing each hurry spell, all investigator, follower, and item abilities can be used again at the normal purchasing cost. When it comes to the purchasing of the hurry spell, it can be done as many times as necessary and can be done after each round of combat. The player also doesn't suffer any sanity loss. In order to win the scenario, the player will need to play all the horrors found in play with no more than 4 minions found on each board when the player completes their turn. The fifth scenario is entitled The Missing and can be played with 1 or more players. And with investigator selection, any investigator is allowed to be selected with the starting experience value consisting of 5. The cult boards that are used consist of all 5 boards. The game duration consists of the tome deck, with the draw rate being that of 4. With the scenario special rule, when the cultist cards are drawn, they are placed off the side of the respective cult board. In order to rescue a cultist, there will have to be no minions or horrors found upon the respective cult board at the end of the combat phase. From there, the player is to spend 2 experience to save them. Otherwise, the player is to draw 3 extra cards the next turn. In order to win the scenario, 10 cultists will have to be rescued with the default conditions consisting of the normal requirements that were addressed earlier. The second scenario is entitled A Growing Problem and can be played with 1 or more players. With investigator selection, any investigator is allowed to be selected with the starting experience value consisting of 4. The cult board that are to be used consists of all 5 boards. The game duration consists of the novella deck, the draw rate being that of 6. With the scenario special rules, all horrors that are drawn are automatically awake, with none of them inflicting sanity loss. They all start off in the minor horror space as well during the turn that they're drawn. If a player attacks a horror and doesn't slay it, then it will advance into the next higher space. If a horror is found in the unspeakable horror space and isn't slain by the next attack, then the player will suffer a wound. The player is also capable of suffering multiple wounds from multiple horrors as long as these horrors are found in the unspeakable horror space. With the attacking of the horrors and gaining experience for slaying them is based upon their current placement upon the cult board, regardless of the horror's printed classification. With the defeat and victory conditions, although unlisted within the rulebook, we assume that the defeat condition is that the player or players are slain by the horrors, with the victory condition being that of the normal requirements that were addressed earlier. The seventh scenario is entitled Piecework and is played with 1 player. With investigator selection, it is limited to that of the detective, with the starting experience value being that of 4. The cult board that are to be used consists of all 5 boards. The game duration consists of the novella deck, with the draw rate being that of 6. With the scenario special rules, after creating the novella deck, pull out 5 investigations in order to make a deck and place it face down next to the draw pile. If there aren't enough investigations found within the novella deck, then obtain the necessary amount for the remaining cards found in the discarded cult deck. When it comes to that, of drawing 5 cards from the cult deck, also draw 1 card from the investigation deck. With any failed investigations, place them off to one side. Play will continue until the player has drawn all 5 cards from the investigation deck. But if the player fails 3 investigations during the course of the scenario, they will immediately fail. With the defeat and victory conditions, they consist of the normal requirements that were addressed earlier. The 8th and final scenario is entitled Legacy and is played with one player. For the investigator selection, any investigator is allowed to be selected with the starting experience value consisting of 8. The cult board that are already used consists of all 5 boards. The game duration consists of the short story deck and the draw rate being that of 7. With the scenario special rules, start play with all 10 cult power cards drawn and affecting all the cult boards, not just their assigned cult board. The player will gain 1 experience for every minion or horror slain and 1 experience for every successful investigation. The player will start the scenario with a ritual dagger, and after using it, the player is able to retain it by spending 2 experience. If the player slays Zath Agora, then it will gain the ritual dagger back for free at the end of the combat step. The cult power card also cannot be destroyed by any means. With the defeat and victory conditions, they consist of the normal requirements that were addressed earlier. With that said, that is what you need to know in order to play the game Cards of Cthulhu. If you liked this episode, feel free to give it a like, and if you want to stay up to date on any future episodes we upload, go ahead and subscribe. You can also support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/checkpointgaming. See you in the next episode, and happy gaming.